Hello, everyone. I'm Saloni Doshi, the founder and director of Space 118. For those who don't know, Space 118 has been an artist studio and residency space for the last 10 years, where we have supported over 400 artists from all over the world. Our vision is to nurture the interdisciplinary impetus of global art practitioners through creative workshops and residencies for experimentation in the visual arts. Standing on the values of dialogue, openness, experience, and collaboration, we have now expanded our role from being a residency space into an independence grants-making organization. Today, after a short break, I welcome you to the next round of On Making 2020, a talk series where we invite artists and curators to take us through their art making and exhibition making practices. At a time like this, we at Space 118 feel it is all the more crucial to bring audiences to a behind-the-scenes perspective into how an artwork, an exhibition, or a practice is made. Whether it's the years of rigor that finally brings an idea to fruition, from process to materiality, or the many hands of institutions and donors who lend invaluable support along the way. Launching round two, we are pleased to have with us this week a true cosmopolitan absurdist, Bani Abidi. Born in 1971 in Karachi, Pakistan, and now working between Berlin and Karachi, Bani uses video and photography to comment on politics and culture, often through humorous and absurd vignettes. She studied visual arts at the National College of Arts in Lahore and at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Whether it is through early works like Mangoes, where she navigates between personal and communal narratives framed by power struggles and geopolitical relations between India and Pakistan, or her latest series, The Lost Procession, that is based on the lived experience of the persecuted Hajra community from Quetta, Pakistan, who have fled to Germany and other countries in recent years. Bani's fascination for the quotidian in exploring the themes of expropriation, refuge, and captivity has remained consistent. With solo shows at the Sharjah Art Foundation, Kunsthaus Hamburg, Dallas Contemporary, Kunstferien Ansburg, the Baltic, and group exhibitions at Kunstraum Bethanien, Edinburgh Arts Festival, Berlin Biennale for Contemporary Art, Guggenheim, Documenta 13, and our very own Kochi Biennale, amongst several others, Bani comes with a long and acclaimed exhibition history. Her work is in the collections of the MoMA, Guggenheim, the British Museum, TATE Modern, the Spencer Museum of Art, the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum, the Berger Collection, Devi Arts Foundation, and the Marguelies Collection, amongst several other private and public collections globally. She was an artist in residence at the famous DAAD Artists Residency in Berlin from 2011 and 12. As a residency organizer and an art patron myself, I have often believed that the landmark victory of putting a great show is to get a great audience. And I would also like to introduce our audience to the Gropiusbau Museum in Berlin, where Bani's retrospective, They Died Laughing, was held last year on the 30th anniversary of the fall of the wall this year. Designed by Martin Gropius, the uncle of Walter Gropius, in close cooperation with Heino Schmeiden, the building was developed with architect Karl Friedrich Schinkel's fundamental design, keeping his fundamental design principles in mind. In 1945, the building was heavily damaged during one of the major bombing raids on the Berlin Wall, and where the north facade and the upper floors were completely destroyed, and the museum holdings and the cellar were burned. The planned demolition of the ruin was halted by the efforts of the famous Bauhaus artist Walter Gropius. And finally, the Gropiusbau was placed under monumental protection in 1966. The reconstruction of the building began in 1976, and it was officially reopened to the public in 81, situated directly on the Berlin Wall in the form of a raw building shell. The new main entrance finally reopened 10 years after the fall, and its present location is where it is today. In 2001, since the Berliner Festspiel took over the operation and the management of the venue, the Gropiusbau has now become the world-renowned venue for modern and contemporary art in dialogue with archaeology and cultural history across the globe. In line with director Stephanie Rosenthal's vision for the building, an exhibition program that puts artists at the center and that is designed to be, in her words, a walk in their minds. I would now ask Falguni Guliani, who is our Space 118 Contemporaries Art Writer in Residence and the moderator for today, to take it from here and introduce the show, They Died Laughing. Welcome, Bani.
Thank you, Saloni, for that illuminating introduction on Bani's practice and its relevance also to the Gropius Bau Museum, whose location in a kind of no man's land, as we just saw, is so interesting to situate Bani's retrospective there, especially on the eve of, like you said, an event like the fall of the Berlin Wall, which signals the dissipation of borders between two countries. It's something we know that so much of Bani's work is also about, not just in relation to India and Pakistan and the border between them, but also in terms of envisioning a world which can exist outside of the defined realms of a nation state. So in that vein of Stephanie's vision, which you just told us about, of taking a walk through the artist's mind, our viewers have a very special treat lined up today. Bani will be taking us through her solo retrospective, They Died Laughing, which was curated by Natasha Jinwala and closed at the Gropius Bau Museum last September. As is the case with most of Bani's work, not only did this show feature an eclectic mix of stylized documentaries, of performance art, of fictionalized narratives, it did so while grappling with questions of identity, of politics, and a culture of control in a really unique way that's become Bani's signature language almost, which is the filmic language of humor. I'm sure she has many insights for us about what this sort of acknowledgement of the absurd has to offer and the appreciation of laughter as a radical action. And I'll not keep her any longer and ask her to just dive straight into these. Over to you, Bani.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. We have a bit of few glitches at least. One should only expect those. Sorry. Thank you everyone at Space 118. This is really fortunate and very lucky to be able to share an exhibition that happened in Berlin and which a lot of my close friends and community in South Asia completely missed out on. It's going to be quite an event taking everyone through this exhibition because it's 9 or 10 different spaces. It was a really big display of around 22 works, selection of works from the past 20 years. So people who went to see it actually spent 3 to 4 hours in the exhibition, but we're going to just sprint through it. But I think it's important to just go through all the different works, because for me at least, what was really interesting and important was to see the kind of things that I seem to be really interested in and in love with, which keep on have returned in my work over the years. And I'll begin with the work that you see on the screen, which is in the first room as you enter. It's a set of watercolors they can call They Died Laughing. And it's also the title of the show. And the story behind this choice of the title of this work and using it for the show as well is that I was reading a book called Udas Naslein by Abdullah Hussain, which is an Urdu book, Weary Generations. And it's set in the first half of the 20th century. And there was a beautiful moment. It's looking at the First World War and Indian soldiers who are in the Western Front in Belgium. And there's this very poignant scene where on the battle front, all the people have been killed, and there are 3 soldiers who are left alive, and young teenage Indian boys. And they are cracking up over some joke, and somebody comes in and says, "Would you understand that the battle is over, and everyone has died outside, there's death and misery around you, and why are you laughing?" And these guys are making a joke about a buffalo in their village at home in India. And they say, "Well, we're going to die, so we might as well die laughing." And that was kind of the way I paraphrase it in Urdu. And I was really interested in that idea of agency at the time of death, and what laughter brings to oneself. These set of watercolors were actually made a year later, and this was in response to a death of a friend who was assassinated in Karachi, Sabeen Mahmood. And there are many conspiracy theories that exist, but we all think we know exactly what happened. And so it was about thinking about death and where do people go and what they stood for. So this is just portraits of people laughing and moments of hysteria in some ways. The second work in the room was Sean Pipe Band, known as the Star Spangled Banner, which is a very old work. And it was made right after I returned to live in Pakistan from the US. And in this work, I commissioned a brass band in Lahore to learn how to play the American anthem. And this is just to give you political context. This is soon after Afghanistan and Iraq have been attacked by the US, and Pakistan is providing airspace to the US. I'm going to play this, and it's short.
मिल गया ना बिना पहले ना ना उम्मीदी तो फिर उन्हें कोई नहीं मिलने उन्हें ना कोई याद कराना तराउन तो नहीं में चलाया तुमने नहीं लाया तराउन
So this was a work, the Shanpai Band was, of course, it was a performance that I had commissioned a brass band in Lahore to learn how to play the anthem, and I just spent a day with them. And it was, what happens in that process is that they're extremely lighthearted. They don't take any of this seriously. And it comes, for me, it was about laughter and in the face of something very, a very absurd proposition. And it was, for me, the strength, the interesting part lay in how little it meant for them. And just to say that through the exhibition, I'm going to be taking you, of course, the works are were not presented chronologically. It was thematically grouped together from any of the various years of my practice. This is the second room, and there were 3 works presented in it. One was Security Barriers, A to Z, which is a set of drawings I've been doing. I did the first set in 2008 and just recently in 2018, which is charting the kind of barrier designs that emerged on the streets of Karachi in the first decade of, since 2003. This is actually very much after 9/11, when the culture of security and paranoia became common fare, and you found a lot of prevention from entering, moving around cities, and especially in Karachi as well. And I started looking at it. Of course, it was a very ironic take on the fact that there are now security barriers, and there's so many that we can do a design typology of them. The blue container in the middle is used to be in front of the old American embassies. American embassy was completely surrounded by containers. The one at the top is a really favorite one of mine because a person can walk through it, but you can't have cars going through. So there are lots of different kinds of design strategies that people chose. And these are all inkjet prints. Some of them are very, and this is the concrete barriers at the bottom left now is the new American embassy, which is mercifully moved to some suburb of Karachi, so we don't have to encounter it. This entire room was arranged around ideas of city surveillance, voyeurism, and what happens to a public on the city streets. This work is called Locations in the Garden of Love. And it was commissioned by the Guggenheim Museum in Toronto in 2014. And it was fun. It was actually about romance and love in public spaces. And I've been forever fascinated by the kind of the way people are incredible voyeurs, people who work in public spaces, the chowkidars, and people who go out and are looking at each other. So couples are always being noticed and stared at, and yet there's a big fascination for love. It's a very romantic society, but yet there's morality and judgment and what all comes into this. So this work was a collaboration with the writer Mohammed Hanif, where I actually asked him to respond to the idea of a couple in various spaces in Karachi, and it's actually shot as a documentary. So Hanif was writing, the story basically is that there is one particular couple that's seen through time and space from the time they were young to the time they become older. And they are seen in different parks and locations in Karachi. And it's different people who are narrating. There's a lady who runs a cafeteria, and it's a first person. I'm not going to be showing all videos, but I'm just explaining and presenting some of the photographs to you. But it was arranged in this manner because I was very interested in sort of conjuring up the space of benches in a park and communal seating. And you look at, and there's no couple, you can't actually see any couple, so they're absent. It's just documentary footage in different places in Karachi. And you hear voices of people talking about a couple. And the third work is Reserved, which is one of my first sort of produced videos, where I actually had a budget and I had a team working with me. And basically it was, it's a video about a city where a VIP, and a lot of people may have already seen it many times, a VIP is about to arrive and everyone's life is at a standstill. And I was very interested in that moment. And I felt that waiting for something to happen, especially in the forms of state or bureaucracy, that was just kind of typified our lives. It's a 2-channel installation. And I'll play it for you. We then enter the third room, and I'll just tell you one interesting thing is that not all the rooms were pitch dark, and these were decisions that Natasha and I made together. So there was lots of window and lots of sky, even though it was a video, so primarily a video heavy exhibition. And that was nice. Some of the walls were painted white. So you didn't feel that you had entered a black box and you just moved through darkness through it all. So it varied in terms of its, the feeling, each room. This is an exhibition called, this is a body of work called Section Yellow, which was actually originally produced for Project 88. I had a show there in 2010, and this originally got showed at that point. And basically the central element of this work is a film called The Distance from Here, which is about sort of the kind of visa regimes that we have to go through in South Asia, and what, again, it's about intimidation and power and control and the kind of affinity that emerges between people who are in all being tested or being made to wait for a similar thing to happen. And I actually recreated the whole space in which you go to apply for visas in Islamabad, and I recreated it in Gurgaon in Delhi. I was living in India at that time. And so the film is what you see on the right here, and all the photographs in the room are taken from the film, so they relate to it. And I think that's the way I work very often. Sometimes I feel I don't feel satisfied with just the film, and I feel I need to extrapolate from it and have other things that relate to it. So I realize now in retrospect that a lot of my video works have some print element that converses with the video. So what you see on the floor is the work Exercise in Redirecting Lines, and it's actually just photographs taken from the set of the film and the vinyl, and they're stuck on the floor. So it's a labyrinth, you can walk on it. I will play the film first, an excerpt, so that
डेट ऑफ बर्थ क्या है आपकी 3/9/1965 पापा का नाम क्या है श्री राम So these are photographs of the folders that we had, the props that were in the film, of the files that all the people waiting were carrying. And I think all of us in Pakistan and India, for sure, can relate to this, the absolutely horrendous task of putting together an application to apply to go to the US or wherever it may be that we're traveling, because the kind of documents, it's like going for a root canal. It's pretty excruciating, and the kind of dossiers on our entire lives that we have to put together, from birth, death, who died, who lived, how much money they had, you know, it's pretty profound that we had to go through that. And I was really interested in that becoming an object to a thing in itself, the file and what it signified. And so I photographed them in this very minimal way, where they kind of signify a horizon in themselves, in itself. This is a work that was originally inkjet prints on the wall, and for this Gropius Bao show, we printed it as a takeaway poster. And it's got, it's about, I felt that the characters in my film were silent, and I needed to give some stories. So I actually took photographs and wrote stories about them, but very sort of minimal. But it is again about this moment of waiting. So the posters are in Arabic, German, and English, and people were taking them away. So yeah, before I move to this room, which is room 4, I just wanted to say that it is, in reflecting, and as we've seen, if you've seen Reserved and you've seen The Distance from Here, excerpts from both of them, and these are films which are both, and a lot of my other films as well, which are completely storyboarded, and the script is written, and script in terms of what's going to happen one after the other. A lot of details are thought about, and I often feel that a lot of this work is, I make it because I'm dealing with spaces which I would never have access to as documentary, in person, in life, as real life events, whether it's a VIP coming or whether it's a visa office. But also being a woman who is kind of shy and very self-conscious of my class and gender, and stepping into public space, which is huge in a place like Karachi. It's diverse, and it's what kind of power would I have, or what would I let go of if I stepped into this place and tried to shoot these things in real life. And I think that's, and also laziness, maybe. I want to get I know exactly, maybe I'm a control freak who knows exactly what I want. And it comes from years of memories of having just watched things. So maybe I'm not even open to accident. But a lot of the work could be documentary because it's silent, and it's just silent cinema, actually. It's just people. And it's a way of recalling and recreating details to the nth degree. But it also gives me the possibility to amplify absurdity, because I'm not leaving it up to chance. I create, I collate all my memories of absurd moments, and I put them together. This work is there are 2 works. Death at a 30-degree angle, which was made which was commissioned by the Karachi Art Foundation and then presented at Documenta in 2012. And in front of it, it's 2 works, one opposite the other. The other is Proposal for a Man in the Sea, and they're related in the following manner, is that I was really interested in making a film about the making of a statue. And this is the time when Mayawati was rejecting her statue left, right, and center. Handbags were not being put in, put out. And there was a lot of conversation in India about Mayawati statues. And also I had been traveling in Congo and in Eastern Europe, and my own memories of colonial statues in Karachi. And of course, there was Saddam's statue, which had been torn down. So there was a lot of statue talk. And yes, my main thing for this work was a reading of a book called The Emperor by Richard Kapuscinski, which is about Haile Selassie, who's the Emperor of Ethiopia, and levels the kind of beautiful details of megalomania and self-aggrandizement. And I wanted desperately to make my own politician. And Danish Hussain was the actor, who was an Indian actor. And I took him into Mr. Ram Suthar's studio, who Ram Suthar is a 95-year-old Indian sculptor who has a studio in Noida. And he's Maharashtrian, and he's been making political statuary forever. And I shot this video. It was shot vertically. It's 3 meters high. So there was this sense of that it needed to be a tall, they needed to be 2 tall videos. So it kind of looms on top of you. And they're projected on these spaces, which are like crates, on these planks of wood, which is like a crate that has been undone. So it's displayed like that. I'm not going to show the film, but I'm just going to take you through it. But basically, while I was shooting it, I realized that, of course, the real life, which is in this case was Ram Suthar's studio, was far more compelling than what I could have ever done myself. So it became a documentation of this studio with a fictional character inserted in it. That's the whole studio. And it's pretty profound because there are Nehrus and Indira Gandhis with broken arms and pigeon shit on their heads. And it's like, there was a lot for in there to work with. It's a pretty stunning space. So opposite the video is, just have to keep it on time. The opposite the video is the installation of photographs called Proposal for a Man in the Sea. And this was actually more about my conversations with Mr. Ram Suthar, who was a very endearing soul. And he was a total Gandhian, and he spoke to me about making of statues and about his own political ideologies, which is that he wanted to make a statue of Gandhi holding 2 Dalit children. And these are proposals, Photoshop proposals that he gave. This is for Delhi, in the coronation. I don't know what that place is called, but he really wanted that, and he spoke about that one day he would make a statue of Gandhi, which would stand in the Arabian Sea, and it would be taller than the Statue of Liberty, and Gandhi would be holding the hands of these 2 children. And then he said, but politics have changed, and everyone wants, now they just want Shivaji, and I'll probably do that as well. So he spoke about how localized politics were, how India had transformed. So he was a very interesting witness to how things had happened. Now he's 95, at that time he was in his 80s. And I was really touched by him, and I'm really interested in that generation of people for whom there's been a lot of loss. They've experienced loss, including my parents, who are my mother's in her 80s. And so just to witness the birth of these countries and how things have played out. So what the installation is just photographs of his studio, but more with the point of view of looking at his own interests. So these 2 works were actually conceived of as in relationship to each other. Then we go into Room 5, which is an unforeseen situation, and the man who, which is after Ilya Kapkov's The Man Who Flew into Space from His Apartment. And this was, I'm just going to take you through this. It actually, the newspaper clipping you see framed on the left, this is what I read in the newspaper. And I saw a photograph and I responded to it and I made a film. And it was actually you'd see it in the film because I'm going to show it to you. But it's looking at masculinity and nationalism and looking at individual men who are trying to do these fantastic feats and compete with each other through the filter of the Guinness Book of World Records. That's what I was referencing, but I was looking at South Asians who are trying to outdo each other. I will play the film for you and then I'll continue with the... So that work, of course, is, I was in particular looking at how India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these countries were trying to compete with each other. India had earlier held the record for the most amount of people singing the national anthem, and Pakistan was trying its best to beat it. And so there was all kinds of permutations and combinations of amount of people singing the national anthem, most amount of people standing and doing this, some always to do with the nation and different sort of parameters. It's actually very interesting. You can enter the Guinness Book of World Record with anything you propose. So it's actually quite a performative space. So you can set a record for yourself and say that I beat it. And then it enters, if they accept it, it enters the Guinness Book of World Records. And through this whole thing, I started looking at men, and also a lot of Pakistani men who were trying to enter the Guinness Book of World Records. And so there was a man who made the world's largest lock, and he was actually sort of a B grade, a B movie, Punjabi movie actor who decided that acting was not his thing. He was going to intern with a locksmith and make the world's largest lock. And there's a lovely documentary on him. And they were really quite endearing characters. So even though I'm making fun of them, and kind of, so I'm kind of mocking them, but there's also a lot of love for the ridiculousness of these gestures. So I did a whole series of watercolors at the same time, which is kind of responding to the idea of men doing, strange things. So this is the man who clapped for 92 hours, the man who walked around in circles for 3 months, the man who yawned continuously for 5 weeks, the man who gave up. And very importantly, the man who gave up. And these, of course, a lot of these are my own titles. I've made them. I've made them up. Some of them are real. This is the man who could split a hair. The man who gave the longest speech, 60 hours and 24 minutes. And this is just an untitled work where these two guys are tugging. So yeah, I think a lot of somebody pointed out that, and I hadn't really ever thought of myself as that, but they said you really make, you end up making fun of men. And I think, yeah, that's right. So it also makes me think about, I've never considered myself like an overt feminist in my practice, but of course there is. So that's where the idea of laughter comes in, because laughter kind of disables power in some ways. So what does mockery and satire do to bodies and spaces that are threatening in some ways? Okay, so now we go into the time. Okay, very good. And then now the tone slightly changes. We are in, this work is called The Lost Procession, as you can see. And I'm not going to show it, but I'll just talk a bit about it. And this was the work that really was the only Berlin-based work. And as I was telling Falguni earlier, my relationship with my making art is very much about where I live. And even though I've been in Berlin for 9 years, I'm still an outsider. And it's my ability to read things, and I can't read things as well, not literally, but psychologically, I can't understand as much. This is a work about the Hazara community that has fled from the Shiite community in Pakistan, who have been persecuted for the past 10 or so years. And they're all in, a lot of them have fled to Australia, and a lot have come to Berlin. So this work is very unlike my other work, and it's a first person narrative of me talking about the complexity of representation when I'm talking about other people. But it was also a way of talking, it was very much made with the idea of a Berlin audience in mind, because the question of the refugee crisis is so much focused on how that changes Europe and how they can or cannot be accommodated, and how Muslims might mess up everything. And this kind of, generally that's a trajectory. And how well they're learning German, even I'm kind of included in that. But what struck me is that these displacements are civilizational disruptors. And whether it's Syria or whether, all of these people are moving away. So it's actually looking at their rituals and how this form of displacement is very severe in terms of world history. Displacement is a very severe thing. And that is not spoken about because it's the dynamics of this movement are very clear-cut. Poor, war-torn countries coming to, people from those countries coming to the first world, so to speak. Anyway, so this was a 16-minute work on that, which I did in collaboration with a photographer who lives in Quetta. He's from the Hazara community. I can see somebody now. Okay. This was the last room within it was an L-shaped exhibition. And this was a huge room, which is with the work Funland, which is a work that was commissioned in 2014 by the Berlin Biennial. And Natasha Jinwala was involved even then at commissioning this work. And it was about this, that was the first time that I actually did documentary. And I told Natasha that I wasn't really interested in scripting anything, that I really wanted to. And this is interestingly, after I've had a child and after I had a kid, I stopped working with big teams and people and planning massive things. And then I started working with a little camera and my iPhone. And that's kind of how I work now. I haven't produced a big film in a long time. And this was about Karachi and how it was changing. And again, it is linked to the changing space, Karachi and the public space in Karachi transforming. And I'm a Shiite Muslim who has had a very, and that identity has been part of my public life, whether it's Ashura and Muharram, I'm out. And that's how was the city changing that was kind of what I was thinking about. And somehow I started censoring myself from the public space out of some forms of fear, not in everyday life, but in particular times of the year. And so I used that as a way to think about Karachi being a dystopic space, which actually people stopped going out. So a lot of the spaces I shot were kind of empty or have been a form of transformation or violence. There's a cinema hall which was burnt down, Nishad Cinema, and it's just, which you see on the right on the screen. And there is a library that is of the Theosophical Society, which had its headquarters in Madras. And it's being censored because they don't, it had books on, most amount of books on comparative religion in Karachi, and that became an issue. And people came and started threatening them to take away books about other religions, so these books were kept away. There's an amusement park, which I think has already been demolished, I'm not sure, but it was going to be taken over by a real estate shark. So different moments of transformation in the city, but they're very cinematic and they're very quiet videos, so it's done very quietly, 2 to 3 minutes, and they all play together. And these standing screens and the way it plays out in the installation is that people move through the space and their bodies become their silhouettes become part of the installation. And the screen and sounds of all of these are playing together. So it's a pretty dramatic work. And it had lots of photographs and print works that went along with it, like things that were literally stuff found on locations, like the index cards of books that were being censored, photographs of film reels that had been burned, and these were part of the display. I'm going to play you, this is 7 minutes, I'm going to play you roughly 2 minutes. So the work that it related to, in some ways, it came out of was there's been a series of a couple of moments where I've been looking at Karachi, and what you see in the background is an earlier work from 2009 called Karachi Series 1, and which are light boxes. And these are similar questions I feel. Again, there's a moment of desolation and people having been vanished. And this is, so all of these are characters, they're all actors. That's my mother. I've asked them to pose doing certain things. So these are fictional photographs shot at dusk under streetlights, and but very much during the month of Ramzan, when streets had become empty, would become completely emptied out when everyone would go into fast to open their fast. And I would, in my mind, these were the non-Muslim characters of inhabitants of Karachi who were coming out to claim that space. And that's it's an ongoing interest for me, because it's a Hindu and a Gujju city prior to partition, and different Gujarati Muslim communities, Hindu communities, Parsis, and similar to Bombay in that way. And it's not an exotic thing. I went to a Parsi school, and my own sense of what Karachi is a very cosmopolitan space, and what its relationship to the sea is compared to the land mass that it belongs to. So I think about that a lot, and I do continue to work with this space. So this is again an instance of fictionalizing, writing a story and giving names to people. This is Chandra Acharya, 7:30 p.m., 30th August, 2008. But also everyone's faces are turned away from the camera. So there's a moment, there's an anonymity and being sort of hiding oneself. That is kind of interesting to me. But also the idea that the city becomes a stage is very important. Even in the videos that you just saw, there are places which are interesting, in which sometimes it's documentary, but I take one protagonist and I plant him or her there and I make things happen. So the significance of a location is very important. And so we get out. This is the last long room of the show. And interestingly, that's my first work. So these are all my videos from 1999 and 2000, 2001, Mangoes, Anthems, The News, and So He Starts Singing. And that's how the audience kind of exits the show, is seeing the earliest works. So the first video that kind of, with which I explored humor, which is Mangoes. This is the Memorial to Lost Words, which is my work about Indian soldiers in World War I, and folk songs from that time, letters and folk songs from that time. Balguni, can I play a small video clip? Yeah. And then we're almost done, yeah? Oh, wait, that was the last one. Okay, this is the video. And this is just the work that I just end with this. This is one work that was spread all across the museum. It's called The Address. And it was very nice because it was at 5 or 6 different locations in the museum, and people would constantly encounter this TV. And the work is a very old one where there's no one coming in. It's a televised national address that's about to happen, and no one comes. And then it culminates with a TV and the photographs of that time. Yeah, so I think that we're done. I think I'm good. I've done good with time. And I would have loved to show you guys all the videos of the party from the opening, because that was the best. We rocked Gropius Bao with 6 hours of like Bollywood and Middle Eastern music, and we were all barefooted. And I think that, yeah, the foundations of Gropius Bao were really shaken that day.
Okay, thank you, Bani, to leave us with that note and that walk that you just took us through of the many rooms and shaken foundations of Gropius Wow. And really the kind of transitions that we see happening across each room, from, the voyeurism of cities in a work like Security Barriers A to Z, to then the hyper, the hyper-vigilance of the hyper-surveillance of visa regimes, which happens on a global level. And then, back again to a kind of really local particularity in a work like The Lost Procession. And what happens in this arc, as you trace these many layers of control that we now live in, what comes out actually is your role as a storyteller. And I want to start with a word that the curator of this show, Natasha Jinwala, has used to talk about you. She's called you an urban archaeologist. And that's really interesting for us in the context of this series on making, because the kind of making that an artist does and the kind of making that an archaeologist does, which is a making of excavation, is similar in a way. So do you think of yourself as an excavator of, when you're making art, an excavator of human psychology, especially considering so many of your subjects are non-actors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as a rule, I don't do any presentation without mentioning the filmmaker who kind of just clarified how I should operate in this work. And is Elia Suleiman, who's a Palestinian filmmaker in New York. It's a rite of passage, I must name him. And I saw his film Divine Intervention when I was instead studying in Chicago. And it's kind of, because he's talking about the occupation of Palestine, and but it's done, and it's an incredibly dark and humorous film. And the way he would describe his process, which is very similar to mine, is like you're sitting at a bus stop waiting for a bus to arrive, and there's a lot that happens in that moment of waiting. And sadly enough, that those forms of waiting, whether it's waiting as I was a Pakistani living in India for 4 years and waiting in the FRRO to register, all these moments where bureaucrats or one person would come and say, oh, you have to wait, and then somebody else is coming, you have to wait. No, we're done, you come tomorrow. So you can't, and it's just this, being a witness, nothing grand, but to the texture of a daily thing, which is profound in the kind of relationships that exist. Who is the person who one is bowing down to and is afraid of? Who are the people who are your people? So yeah, I think that I totally agree with that. I mean, I with that term, that it is something like that. Being an identifier and an articulator, and enchanting people with some very ordinary moments. So it is ordinary. There's nothing spectacular that ever happens in my work.
I want to use this notion of waiting, especially for something completely ordinary and, as you say, nothing spectacular, and really focus our conversation on a work that you said is your most beloved, which is Reserved. And I remember in one of our curatorial calls, you said that it really typifies the way that you work, because you identify a small detail, a really tiny, everyday grain of living, as you said, and let the viewer linger on to that. It's almost Beckettian, this idea of waiting for something that doesn't happen or is not even all that grand. And can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of waiting? Do you, for example, wait for works to happen to you? And how crucial is waiting in your process of making something? I know you said that often your films will have a print accompaniment to your work, that you found out, that there's that retrospective connection between them. And you talk about years of memory and kind of capturing that and not letting it being open to chance. But if you're waiting for something to happen, it is a final submission to chance. So I just want to understand the relationship between waiting for something and your creative process.
Well, I mean, waiting conceptually, of course, I mean, I didn't intend for it to be, theoretically be such a poignant choice, but it is. I mean, as a Pakistani and with political realities and in 100 different ways, it's not accidental that I make works about waiting and about this moment in between, whether it's the person who's going to come and give the changing leaders who come and give talks or whatever. So that, of course, has always been, I'm aware of that, of what kind of solidarity does that moment of waiting and suspense create. In terms of my own practice, it's strange because recently it's very intuitive. Things happen and I notice one thing, like for instance, I'm really interested in the idea of making a film which is about a fight, just a fight between men over something. So that little moment where the man, one man, especially this very Pakistani, on streets of Pakistan, they grab the other, and then within minutes, 20 people have collected. So who's the spectator? Who are the protagonists of that fight? So these are things that I remember, and they're very more important to see how human beings behave with each other. So these things stay in my mind, and then of course they come out. It's very intuitive, but things kind of overlap. These days, for instance, I'm trying to make a lot more work, or wanting to make work which deals with history in some manners, and it's much harder, I find, to do a lot of research and read, and then to force it into some kind of vessel. Because I work the other way around. I find a moment, and then it kind of just grows into something that is more meaningful, rather than top down. Like find something interesting and find, okay, should I put archival photographs? So I'm actually playing with these ideas of which way to go. And the form is very important to me. And the form is not film. The form is that moment that played out in front of me. That is the form, that is the performance and moment that happened. So yeah, chance plays a role in so far as that there has to be a perfect combination between a thought and something that I intuitively really relate to.
So because you're talking about form and your protagonists and the spectators, like you said, in a Pakistani street fight, I remember when we were thinking about what should be the headline image for the invite of your talk, Saloni and I decided to pick the one that we picked, this lone figure of the boy looking at a beach in the distance. He's on a sea of chairs, because there's something so meditative about that. And it reminds me actually, and I want to quote you here, of what you had said about the show, whose title we'll come to in just a minute. You had said that absurdity is rife all around us in the way political realities are unfolding across the world. I think it's quite poignant to be able to laugh at what we bear witness to. Otherwise, we would all just succumb to a troublesome reality. And in relation to the title of the show, which is They Died Laughing, I want to think a little bit about this succumbing to troublesome reality, because you've spoken about how laughter is, an act of exercising radical agency. You told us about the story of the soldiers and them laughing in their moment of death. So it's really quite, like you said, an empowering and energizing gesture. But if it is also the gesture which is, the last resort, the last straw that you have in the face of strife and death, how do you reconcile the despondency which is inherent in that, and then channel it into something that can be positively radical?
I think I was still telling you earlier, I think that the owners of the sort of how abject everything is, and that of reality right now, and especially in this year, everything has happened suddenly. Lots of things have happened suddenly. Of course, all of my work is very deeply ironic, of course. So there are no answers of the I'm unable to fix anything, and I think this is a moment or suggest anything. I just feel it's also these days, in fact, I'm really interested in exploring grieving. So I've just done a work which is about grieving. So extreme grieving and extreme hysteria and this kind of maniacal reactions. But it's also a way of perpetual distancing. I think that's what my laughter as an agency is also. But it's not just laughter in the fear of despondency, but laughter in the face of power. And even when a lot of these, Me Too movement, after Me Too movement, I remember this protest in Birmingham last year, where this girl is kind of just standing like this and laughing at this horrible thug who's just in her face. Like you can almost see his spit on her. And she's just sort of standing with great poise and just smiling at him. And it was just such a stunning image. So of course, there's no solution to the. There's nothing that one can do about it. It is a despondent time, and of course, very often one thinks, what is it with the art world, and why am I in the art world? It's the most exclusive space of all the spaces. But I think it's just that it's being able to provide moments of laughter and reflection and crying, but nothing. Even the laughter is not very spectacular in my work. You just kind of smile and go through it. Yeah, I don't know that that answers your question, but
it does. And before I go on to my next question, I just want to remind our viewers, if you have any questions for Bani, you can put them in the chat and we'll be happy to take them. So that's just a quick reminder for everyone. But Bani, I want to continue on. I'm sorry, I think I'm just obsessed with this image of the chair. And, from there to go on to your work, An Unforeseen Situation, which, I mean, to me, really has, especially with the sound of these crackling walnuts, it has a kind of a very money call, uski roti kind of quality to it. Now, I don't know if you've seen that film or whether you'll agree with this comparison. But, there's something that you said about that work, and it's also in your presentation where you showed us that photograph of the newspaper clipping, which inspired you to make this work. And I know that you said, and again, I'll quote you here, that you take cues from news and life stories because you never can conjure up gestures and narratives that compete with the real incidents unfolding out there. And of course, this can also be read in the context of what you said about Ram Suter and what rich material you found in his studio, as opposed to something that, a narrative that you could create out of it. So from this context, I want to go into a question that I want to ask in all artists whose work gets put under this banner of the political, whether they intend for it to put it in that banner or not. And if you especially are working with raw material, which is, say, the news, we know it to be completely despondent and all too grim and even competing with fiction in today's times. So if your raw material out of which you make work is something like that, then how do you deal with the transparency of it and the political transparency of it? Is that something you aspire for your work, to wear its identity on its sleeve, that when people look at it, they say, okay, this is Bani Abidi's work, it's from such and such news context, this is the ideology to which it subscribes? Or do you think in your case, humor becomes a tool to subvert this transparency?
Yeah, I think that it isn't, because it's most of the work. Yes, for instance, a work like Memorial to Lost Words, which is looking at Indian soldiers, like the millions of foot soldiers for the British. Now that is a very particular political allegiance. I'm unearthing histories that are unacknowledged, but. So I'm just saying, it's more recent that I started dealing with particular history and political moments. And even in my earlier work, Shanpai Band, which is dealing with the war on terror, is kind of a very particular geopolitical moment. But the rest of the work, I don't think, of course, there's something political inherent in it all. But it's not I never wanted to be, I never wished it to be politics with a capital P in any way. But I think a lot of things are just, yeah, so no, I definitely don't, and I don't even consider my work to be very political, actually. It's very political in terms of, yeah, I'm very much against the idea. I'm very, like, I'm not a very patriotic Pakistani, but I love Pakistani. So that I'm very again. I criticize the state. So I'm critical of the state, and I'm kind of post allegiance to a particular state. I've lived in so many different places. I've lived in India and been this ambassador for India when I went back to Pakistan. So these kind of positions, political positions, are important to me in my identity. But other than that, I mean, politics are very complicated. I mean, for here, everyone is like, you're either left or whatever. Everyone is left, and for me, that these categories don't really mean that much, because I come from a much more complicated universe of, like, you know, being a child of a young nation and all of the kind of things that intellectual universe that I've grown up with. So it's much more complex, yeah.
Yeah. So on that note of you know, of what our political ideologies are, and you know, how complex they can be, and they don't need to subscribe to this, you know, one overarching thing. I want to ask you in conclusion a question that's been asked out possibly for all diaspora artists, you know, that do these words, these tags even mean anything to you? You know, diaspora, globalized art world, and so on. I mean, on the one hand, the stylistic and theoretical concerns in your work are less rooted in your particular, and if I may say so, like you said, your peripatetic, all over the place kind of, you know, personal history. And yet they rely on specific contexts and kind of a nebulous cloud of ideas, of images and information that hovers over this kind of urbanized world. So can you tell us how, I mean, we started our introduction to you in this webinar by calling you a cosmopolitan absurdist. So can you tell us about how this cosmopolitanism finds a seat in your practice and in your vision for the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, and this show was a very interesting one in negotiating this. And there were a lot of something that I wanted to point out about the show, which is happening in Berlin. It's a very high profile institution. So there were going to be a lot of visitors. It was the most visited show. I was very fortunate in the museum last year. But Natasha and I made some very important choices. One was there was no didactic text. There was just one wall text as you began the show. And then there was nothing telling you about anything. You just looked at the titles, and then there was a booklet that if you wanted, you could read about the narratives behind the work. And that was because for me, being Pakistani is, I'm completely proud of being, that kind of labeling of being Pakistani and South Asian is my normal. It's not something I fight for, and that's not something I have any problems being called. But I always say this, and I sick of myself, hearing myself saying this, but what I understand about Karachi or Delhi or South Asia is my grammar. And so I am not really interested in, I'm not a native informant. And I wanted to make sure that the show was not perceived as me being informing or educating anyone about Pakistan. And mercifully, the German press dealt with it really well. And yeah, they didn't actually, they looked at it for its form, for the kind of, the way I deal with film and ideas, and it doesn't come out of not wanting to be Pakistani. It's just assuming that Pakistan is my center, and that's my center, just like a German artist center is Germany. And it's that. And I think that the West as a center and everyone else being outside it is just such a blasé and passé idea. Is a passé idea. So. Yeah, so I don't, I work with, I understand Pakistan really and South Asian language, and this is also about language. I understand things better. And that's what I work with, because that's what kind of my intuition works with the best.
Since we're talking about centers and the West, what are centers of our world are and the Western canon, I think I'll just take one question from Indra Pramit Roy, which has just come in. He's the Dean of MSU Baroda. He asks that considering that so much of your work starts from a very humanistic premise, but springs from the specific context of South Asia, what does living in Berlin square up? You mentioned a particular work addressed to the Berlin audience. So do you feel you have to explain yourself too much for an audience that's not really clued in?
Yeah, so I think I already just answered that. What I learned from showing here and the work that I've shared with you guys was that the Berlin audience actually took it without much explanation. They responded to all scenes of waiting, of power, of statue making, whatever everything offered, and competition and masculinity, humor. They were able to read a lot into it, and I think that was for me really successful, where the climate and the color of people's skin and the particularity of a geographic difference did not come in the way of anything, and that was successful because it became about this humanistic moments and not about Pakistan. So I think it's also the way one presents themselves and chooses to, and we really pushed for it to be it was about things I was dealing with, not about a country. But in terms of making work, I think it's extremely hard, and I'm at a loss for the most part, because my inspiration kind of runs dry, and being an outsider has its own benefits, but making is much harder. But yeah, no, I was very, it's been interesting to have this experience of having such a massive show in Germany.
Thank you, Bani. That's a really important distinction that we'll end on, about how the making comes from this very particular context, but the receiving of it, you know, can appeal to so many audiences across nations and languages and skin colors, like you said. So on that note of your very successful show, I'll ask Saloni to come in and give her vote of thanks.
Thank you, Falguni, and thank you, Bani, for that wonderful conversation. What a pleasure it's been, Bani, to launch our series with you. I mean, the second half. I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed this as well and have got an insight into your practice, which is truly cosmopolitan and transcending nation states, languages, and other barriers that you have spoken about today. So on behalf of Space 118, on behalf of all those that are viewing this and those who will be viewing this later, I truly thank you for giving us a glimpse into your ever-evolving practice, from sitting in Berlin and talking about countries and, you know, works from all across. So we're back next Sunday and with another speaker and another show. And believe me when I say that it is one that I cannot capture in words. We have Murtaza Wali, who will be taking us through his show Crude at the Jameel Arts Center that took place, I think, last year in Dubai. So see you next week.
Thank you, guys. Bye.